Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. The hut wasn't supposed to be home. It sat on a shoulder of rock above the tree line like a forgotten utility box, painted a tired off-white that had gone chalky in the sun, bolted to a concrete pad, and wrapped in a chain-link fence that had long ago stopped being impressive. If you didn't know it was here, you'd never find it. From the nearest county road, it was a steep climb through switchbacks and logging spurs that dead-ended into rough two-track. After that, it was boots and breath, up through fir and hemlock across talus and into wind that smelled like stone and old snow. The view was why the relay hut existed. From up here you could see the valley like a map, the river shining like a pulled wire, the patchwork of ranch land, the line of the highway, and the tiny squares that were rooftops. The valley had always felt busy from down there, full of engines and errands and people who thought they had time. From up here it looked fragile, like something you could erase with a thumb. I was the one who came up here when things broke. My name is Dylan. Before everything went dark, I was a field radio technician for a regional communications contractor. One of those companies nobody thinks about until their phone stops working, their dispatch can't reach a unit, or a mountain repeater goes quiet in a snowstorm. I did microwave relay sites, VHF and UHF repeaters, backup power systems, and the unglamorous reality of keeping metal boxes full of electronics alive in places where the weather actively wanted them dead. I knew this hut well. It was labeled in our paperwork as Ridge 11 Relay, a hop in a microwave chain that carried data and voice traffic across the Cascades for a mix of clients. A couple of small internet providers, some municipal links, and one contract that kept the county's emergency radio backbone stitched together when lines went down. It was never staffed. Nobody lived here. It wasn't built for people. But it was built to survive. The walls were steel-skinned panels over a frame, anchored into concrete with heavy bolts. The roof was reinforced for snow load, and the door was a thick insulated slab with a gasket that sealed tight. There were lightning arresters, grounding straps, surge protectors, and a copper ground ring buried around the pad that tied everything into earth like a promise. Inside, the air was always cool and dry, and the hum of equipment felt like a heartbeat. When the outbreak hit, I ran toward the one place I understood. A hard box on a mountain with power, antennas, and the best line of sight for miles. I didn't come up here with a heroic plan. I came up here because, down in the valley, I watched the rules break, one by one, and I knew what came after. It started like a bad week that wouldn't end. At first, it was just noise. Clips online, arguments, shaky footage. People coughing in hospitals, then people fighting in parking lots. Then the public health alerts turned from careful to blunt. Then the sheriff's office stopped answering non-emergency calls. Then the highway jammed and stayed jammed. I was in Ellensburg, Washington on a service call when the first real wave rolled through the valley towns east of the mountains. I remember the name because it mattered later. Kittitas Valley. A wide bowl of land with wind farms on the ridges, cattle and hay below, and a river that cut through it like a seam. The morning it turned, I was at a small comms cabinet behind a municipal building, swapping a failed power supply. I'd been there an hour. I heard sirens, but sirens never meant much anymore, just part of the background. Then I heard screaming. It came from the street, raw enough that it stopped my hands. I stepped out from behind the cabinet and saw people sprinting between parked cars. A woman in a tan jacket stumbled, fell hard, and rolled onto her side. A man reached for her, hesitated, then yanked her up by the elbow like he was hauling a sandbag. Across the street, a group of 3 moved wrong, fast but loose, like puppets with bad strings. Their heads snapped toward sound, not sight. One slammed into a truck tailgate and didn't flinch. Another hit the side of a sedan with its shoulder and kept coming, hands clawing at the air. I knew, in that instant, that the videos were real. I didn't stand there long. I'm not built for denial, I'm built for diagnosis and action. I got back in my work truck, locked the doors, and drove out of town using alleys and service roads until the streets opened. People were already abandoning cars. The main road toward the interstate had a knot of vehicles around a minor crash. Horns stuck, doors open, nobody steering anymore. I didn't try to push through that. I took the long way, up toward the foothills, because I knew those roads. I'd driven them in every season, sometimes at night, sometimes in whiteout conditions, because relay sites don't care about your schedule. My phone buzzed constantly. At first, it was family group texts, coworkers, news. Then the network started to stutter. Pages wouldn't load, calls dropped. Bars flickered from 3 to 1 to none, like a heart monitor going flat. At a pullout near a trailhead, I got a call from my supervisor, Rita Saldana. She sounded like she'd been running. "Dylan," she said, "where are you?" "Out of town," I said. "What's going on?" A pause, like she was choosing words in a burning room. "We lost Ridge 11 half an hour ago," she said. "Telemetry went weird, then nothing. We're losing hops all over. If you can get to it." "I can," I said, already turning the truck onto the logging spur that climbed toward the ridge. "But you need to tell me straight, is it safe?" She exhaled. "Nothing's safe. But if that hut stays alive, it keeps a lot of links alive. County uses it, fire uses it. Some medical traffic routes through it. If there's any chance at coordinating, I'm going," I said. "Dylan," she added, voice tightening. "Don't play hero. If you go up there, you might not come back down." I looked at the tree line ahead, at the narrow road that climbed into emptier country. "I'm not coming back down anyway," I said, and ended the call before she could answer. The road up was worse than I remembered, and I remembered it rough. It had rained the night before, and the 2-track was slick mud over a hardpack. The truck's tires hunted for grip. Branches scraped the sides. Twice, I had to get out and drag fallen limbs away because I didn't want to risk getting stuck with nobody around to pull me free. Halfway up, I passed a Forest Service gate that had been closed last time I was here. Someone had cut the chain. The gate was hanging open like a broken jaw. That should have warned me. It did. I just kept going. By the time I reached the point where the road ended and the foot trail began, the sun was low enough to throw long shadows through the trees. The wind had picked up. My ears popped with elevation. The air smelled like cold rock and sap. I loaded what I could carry. A backpack stuffed with tools, spare fuses, a handheld radio, 2 bottles of water, energy bars, and a small first aid kit. I grabbed the hard case that held my test gear, lightweight stuff, not the full bench setup, just enough to troubleshoot. A small multimeter, a Coax tester, a compact spectrum analyzer I'd borrowed once and never returned, and a set of adapters for waveguide and Coax connectors. Then, after a moment of staring at the forest like it might speak back, I went back into the truck and opened the locked compartment under the rear seat. Inside was the thing I'd never expected to rely on for work. A pump-action shotgun and a small box of shells. I'd kept it there for years because some sites weren't just remote. They were isolated in a way that attracted the wrong kind of attention. Mostly, it was for cougars, or the occasional aggressive trespasser who didn't like being told to leave. I didn't want to take it. But the valley had already told me this wasn't about wanting. I slid the shotgun into a simple sling, checked that the safety was on, and started up the trail. The relay hut appeared the way it always did, not gradually but suddenly, like you'd stepped into its field of influence. 1 minute it was trees and rock. The next, the slope leveled into a scraped pad of gravel and concrete, and there it was. Steel box, antenna mast, and a cluster of dishes aimed over the valley like eyes. The fence around it had been cut. That made my stomach drop because nobody cut that fence for fun. The fence was there to keep out animals and honest people. The ones who cut fences were neither. I moved slow after that, using the edge of the tree line as cover. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, only that I didn't want to be surprised by it. The hut itself looked intact. No obvious damage to the door, no shattered vents, no bullet holes. The dishes on the mast were still aligned, and the waveguide runs looked undisturbed. But the pad had footprints. Fresh, mud tracked across concrete. And on the gravel near the fence I saw a torn strip of cloth, darkened with dried grime. It snagged on the cut wire like someone had ripped free. I listened. Wind. A distant bird. The faint electrical hum that I only noticed because I'd lived around it for so long. The hut still had power. I didn't breathe normally until I was inside. The door's original lock had been forced at some point, probably the same people who cut the fence, and it hung slightly crooked. The deadbolt still worked, but it didn't seat right in the frame. I got in, shut the door behind me, and immediately engaged the deadbolt anyway, because a wrong lock was better than an open one. The inside smelled like dust and cold metal, familiar enough that it almost calmed me. Equipment racks lined one wall. Rectifiers, network gear, radio controllers, and an old microwave terminal that looked like it belonged in a museum. On another wall was the backup power system, a bank of sealed lead-acid batteries wired into a 48-volt direct current system, connected to a charger and inverter. A small propane heater sat in a corner for freeze protection, tied into a thermostat. A little status panel blinked red on one of the network units. I dropped my pack, pulled off my gloves, and went to work like the world outside didn't exist. Because the truth was, working kept me from panicking. First I checked the basics. Incoming power was good, line voltage normal, no obvious surge events. The rectifier output was stable. Battery bank showing healthy charge. Inverter online. The equipment was running. So why had telemetry gone dark? I moved to the microwave terminal unit, checked the link lights. One was down. Not all links, just one hop. That made more sense. The hut had multiple dishes aimed in different directions. If one hop dropped, it could sever a chain depending on routing. I dug into the cabinet, traced the coax run, and found the problem in minutes. The connector on one line had been loosened, just enough to break the connection. Not enough to look obviously tampered with. It wasn't weather, it wasn't vibration. Someone had done it. A sabotage that didn't smash anything. A quiet cut to the throat. I tightened the connector, reseated it, and watched the link light flicker, then go green. I felt something like relief, until I remembered why someone would do that. Either to knock out communications, or to lure a tech up here. Either way, I'd arrived right on schedule. I got the telemetry console running and checked logs. The link had dropped right around midday. Then there was a brief burst of traffic. Someone had plugged in, accessed the system, and changed a few settings. Not much, just enough to disrupt routing. My hands went cold. This wasn't random. Someone knew what they were doing. Or someone had gotten lucky. I tried to call Rita back, no cell signal. The handheld radio had decent reach from up here. I powered it on and scanned the channels I knew were used by county dispatch, fire, and the amateur radio operators who always seemed to know more than the news. The speaker hissed, then, faintly, a voice. Unit 12. Repeat. Barricade. Not holding. It was broken, but it was something. I adjusted, dialed, and listened harder. The voice sharpened. Avoid the West End. They're coming through yards. No visual on. Then it cut to static. I switched to another frequency, one that wasn't in any official list. An old maintenance channel we used between texts when we didn't want to clog the main. Nothing. I turned the squelch down, scanned again and caught a faint carrier that sounded like someone keying a microphone and forgetting to speak. Then a voice, female, strained, repeating like a loop. If anyone can hear this is a distress call. We're at the old ranger station. We have injured, we have children, we need help. If anyone can hear this, it repeated, then paused, then repeated again. The cadence was wrong, too even, like someone had recorded it and set it to play automatically. My chest tightened anyway, because, automatic or not, it meant somebody had been alive long enough to set up a repeating call. And it meant they were close enough that my hut could hear it. I looked out the small window that faced the valley. The light had faded to late afternoon, the sun dropping behind ridges. In the distance, a thin line of smoke rose from somewhere low, maybe a house, maybe a vehicle fire. The highway was visible as a gray ribbon. Even from here, I could see the scatter of stopped cars. I'd told myself I was coming here to keep the system alive, to help coordination, to listen and stay invisible. But there it was, an invitation to break my own rules. I could respond, I could transmit back and tell them I heard them. But if it was recorded, whoever said it might not hear my reply. And if it wasn't recorded, then whoever heard my reply might not be the person I wanted. On the wall, near the door, a laminated site plan was taped up. Equipment layout, power cutoffs, emergency numbers. I stared at it like it could give me permission. I didn't have permission from anyone. I only had the choice. I made the choice to survive first. That night, I reinforced the hut. I didn't do it with dramatic flair. I did it the way I did everything, practical, quiet, and based on what fails in the real world. The door came first. The existing deadbolt was decent, but the frame was compromised from whoever forced the lock earlier. I pulled the interior trim, found the weak point where the bolt seated, and added a steel strike plate scavenged from a spare parts bin. It wasn't perfect, but it gave the bolt more meat to bite. Then I installed heavy industrial latches, the kind used on outdoor electrical cabinets. One high, one low, anchored into the door, and the frame with bolts and backing plates. I didn't trust screws. Screws back out, bolts hold. The vents were next. The hut had 2 ventilation ports, one intake, one exhaust, protected by louvers to keep rain out. The louvers would stop leaves and birds. They would not stop something desperate with fingers. I cut sections of metal mesh from an old cable tray panel, shaped them to fit, and fastened them over the vent openings from the inside using bolts and washers. If something tried to push in, it would hit steel. I checked the roof hatch, mostly used for hoisting equipment. It was locked, but I added another latch inside. The roof could handle weight, but I didn't want weight on it. I didn't want anything testing how much it could handle. Inside, I rearranged. Old electronics racks became shelves. I pulled unused panels, cleared space for storage. I moved the battery bank's cover so I could access the terminals if I needed to, but I also made sure nothing metallic could fall across them. 48 volts direct current won't usually arc like high-voltage alternating current, but a short across a battery bank can still turn a wrench into a branding iron and your day into a disaster. I inventoried what I had. The hut had water, 2-gallon jugs for maintenance crews. It had a small stash of emergency rations, ancient but sealed. It had spare fuses, spare rectifier modules, coax jumpers, and a few lengths of copper grounding strap. It had a compact fire extinguisher. It didn't have bedding. It didn't have a toilet. It didn't have comfort. I made comfort anyway. I used a foam equipment packing pad as a sleeping mat, put my jacket under my head, and kept the shotgun within reach but not in my hands. I ate an energy bar and drank water slowly, like I was rationing, because I was. Before I slept, I climbed onto the roof, staying low, and checked the antenna mast. The mast was bolted to the hut and guyed with steel cables that sang softly in the wind. The dishes were aligned and locked. The coax and waveguide runs were intact. From the roof, the valley looked darker than it should have been. Normally, even at night, you'd see a scatter of town lights. Street lamps, house lights, the steady glow of the highway. Now, there were patches of darkness, like missing teeth. A few lights flickered, running on backup generators. Somewhere, a rotating beacon from a tower still turned, lonely and pointless. And in the far distance, I saw movement that made my throat close. Not one thing, many. A slow, drifting pattern near a cluster of buildings at the edge of town. Even from miles away, it looked wrong, like a crowd that didn't disperse. I went back inside, locked everything again, and tried to sleep. I woke to radio noise, not the normal hiss. A sharp burst of voice that cut through my half-dream like a hand on my shoulder. Repeat, county to any unit. If you can hear, respond. I snapped upright, grabbed the handheld, and turned the volume down. The voice came again, clearer now, maybe because the atmosphere had shifted overnight. County dispatch to any unit still operational. Do not approach the hospital. Repeat, do not approach. Then a squeal of feedback, then silence. I sat there in the dark, listening to the hut's hum, and felt the weight of isolation settle deeper. This wasn't a single incident. It wasn't a riot. It wasn't a temporary failure. This was a collapse that had enough structure left to warn people, but not enough to save them. At sunrise, I forced myself into motion. Staying inside without a plan turns your mind into a trap. You start looping on fear. You start hearing threats in wind. So, I made a list. Keep the hut powered. Keep the hut secure. Gather intelligence from radio. Find out who sabotaged the link. Decide whether to respond to the distress call. The last one sat on the list like a stone. The distress call repeated again mid-morning. Same words, same cadence. If anyone can hear this, this is a distress call. I recorded the frequency and direction the signal seemed strongest. The hut's equipment let me do crude direction finding by comparing signal strength on different antennas. It wasn't a fancy setup, but it was enough to guess that the source was somewhere northwest, deeper into the national forest, maybe near an old ranger station I vaguely remembered from site maps. I knew the place. Saley Elam Ranger District had a handful of facilities scattered out there. Old buildings, sometimes used for seasonal crews, sometimes empty. If someone had holed up in one of those, it would make sense. They'd have a gate, a building, maybe a generator, maybe stored supplies. It also might have attracted attention. Around noon, I heard footsteps outside. Not close at first, just the crunch of gravel beyond the hut's wall. Then the metallic rattle of the cut fence wire shifting. I froze, radio in hand, eyes locked on the door. The footsteps moved slowly, like someone pacing. Then a voice muffled through the steel wall. Hello? It wasn't a moan. It wasn't the mindless noise I'd heard in town. It was a person. My mouth went dry. The voice came again, a little louder. "Anybody in there?" I didn't answer, not immediately. Answering was a choice you couldn't unmake. I moved to the small side window and peeked through the edge of the blind. A man stood near the fence line, hands visible, no weapon raised. He wore a dark rain jacket, muddy jeans, and a backpack that looked too heavy. His hair was short, his face drawn. He looked up at the antenna mast like he was assessing it. Then he looked at the hut's door. He spoke again, voice steady but tired. "I saw the link light last night," he said. "Means somebody fixed it. I'm not here to cause trouble." That was oddly specific. I kept watching. He took a step back from the door, raising his hands higher. "My name's Mark Tanaka," he said. "I'm a volunteer with Kitata Search and Rescue. Or I was. I've got a busted leg and I'm running out of water." He shifted his weight and I saw the stiffness. One pant leg was dark with dried mud and something else. Nothing bright, nothing dramatic, just the kind of stain you get from a wound that wasn't cleanly wrapped. He didn't look like he was acting. But people can act. I stayed silent long enough that he glanced around uneasy. Then he spoke again, and this time his voice cracked just enough to sound real. "I'm not asking you to open up," he said. "I'm asking if you can spare water. You can set it outside. I'll back away." I didn't want to open the door. But I also didn't want to become someone who listened to a human voice and did nothing. I found myself speaking before I'd fully decided. "Back to the fence," I called through the door. My voice sounded too loud in the hut. "Sit down, hands visible." He startled, then nodded fast. "Okay," he said, moving to the fence line and lowering himself carefully until he was sitting on the gravel, back against the cut wire, hands resting on his knees. I grabbed one of the gallon jugs, poured some into a smaller bottle so I didn't give away everything, and found a spare coil of thin rope from the tool bin. I looped the rope around the bottle, cracked the door just enough to slide it out, then latched it again. "Don't come near the door," I called. "I won't," he said. I waited, watching through the window. He didn't rush, he didn't lunge. He only reached for the bottle after a full 10 seconds, like he was proving he could follow rules. He drank like his body needed it more than pride. When he finished, he set the bottle down carefully and pushed it away from himself, palms out. "Thank you," he said, voice rough. "I'm not looking to take your spot. I don't know where else to go." That, more than anything, made me believe him. Because if he'd been here to take the hut, he'd have tried already. I didn't open up, not yet. "What happened to your team?" I asked. His eyes lowered. He swallowed. "Called out to help at a roadblock," he said. "People were trying to keep traffic from pushing into town, then it wasn't people anymore. We lost 2. I got separated. Fell on a slope and tore my leg up. Been moving slow ever since." I watched him, measuring every movement. "You sabotaged the link yesterday," I asked. His head snapped up. "What?" "The connector was loosened," I said. "That was deliberate." He stared like I'd accused him of setting the forest on fire. "No," he said, and the anger in his voice sounded clean. "Why would I do that? That link was the only reason I even thought to come here. I was hoping somebody would be up here, somebody with radio." My skin prickled. If it wasn't him, then someone else had been here. Someone who knew just enough to quietly disable communications. And they might come back. Mark shifted, grimacing. "Look," he said, "I can help. I'm good in the woods. I can move quietly. I've got a map in my pack and I've got information." "Like what?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded toward the hut. "There's a group down in the valley," he said. Not official, not county, armed guys. They've been hitting places for supplies. I saw them twice. They're using radios, cheap handhelds, but they know the repeaters. They were talking about turning off the ears on the mountain. My stomach went tight. Turning off the ears, I repeated. He nodded. That's you. That's this place. I think they messed with your connector. And if they know it's back online, they might come up here. The hut suddenly felt smaller. I looked at the door latches I'd installed, the mesh over vents, the sturdy walls. It was a good box. But every box has a limit when enough pressure is applied. I kept my voice steady. Do you have a weapon? He lifted his hands again. A knife for rope, not a gun. Okay, I said. I didn't want to open the door, but leaving him outside wasn't a long-term solution. Not if the armed group came and not if infected wandered up here. Which they could, given enough time and enough noise. I made a choice that felt like stepping off a ledge. Move to the corner of the hut, I told him. The side without a window, face away from the door. He did it slowly, carefully, wincing with each step. I unlatched the door, opened it just enough to aim, scanned the pad, then opened wider. Inside, I said, quick, shut the door behind you and keep your hands where I can see them. He limped in, breathing hard, and I shut and latched the door fast. For a moment, we stood in the narrow space like strangers in an elevator during an earthquake. Mark looked around at the racks and blinking lights. His eyes widened. Still running, he said, almost reverent. Barely, I said, sit. He sat on the floor against the wall, letting his leg extend. Up close, I could see swelling around his knee and shin. His improvised bandage was tight but messy. He'd done what he could. I kept distance. I kept the shotgun slung but ready. I hated that I was thinking like that, but thinking like that was how you stayed alive. What's your plan? He asked, voice calmer now that he was out of the wind. My plan was to stay quiet and listen, I said. Then you showed up. Now I have to adjust. He nodded, like he understood adjustment as a lifestyle. He reached slowly into his pack and pulled out a folded map. Forest Service style, creased and worn. He laid it on the floor between us. There's a ranger station here, he said, tapping a spot northwest. This is where that repeating distress call is coming from. I was closer to it 2 nights ago. I heard the signal with my own radio before mine died. You heard it live? I asked. I heard someone speak between repeats, he said. A man. Not recorded. He said they were low on medicine. I changed the math. A live voice meant a live receiver. And you didn't go? I asked. I tried, he admitted. But I got turned around in the dark and I couldn't risk moving fast with my leg. Also, he hesitated. Also, there were infected in the trees. Not many, but enough. I stared at the map. If there were people at the ranger station, they were making noise. Repeating distress calls are noise. Noise travels. Noise brings attention. Mark watched my face. You're thinking about it, he said. I'm thinking about everything, I replied. He nodded. If you're going, you shouldn't go alone. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. 2 people, one limping, heading out into a forest full of things that used to be people, while armed scavengers might be climbing the same mountain to silence a relay hut. This was what the world had become. Impossible decisions stacked on each other like bad wiring. We're not going today, I said. Mark's shoulders sagged slightly, but he didn't argue. Okay, he said, then we prepare. So we prepared. We worked like men who had run out of time but still cared about doing things right. First, we addressed Mark's leg. I'm not a medic, but I know enough to respect infection and swelling. I cleaned the wound as best I could with what we had. Sterile wipes from the first aid kit, clean water, fresh gauze. We rewrapped it tighter but not strangling, and I made him elevate it using a folded maintenance mat. Then we went through the hut's resources and made an actual survival plan. Power was the heart. If the hut lost power, the radios went silent, and our listening post died. The hut was connected to grid power through a line that ran down the ridge. If the valley was failing, that line might fail too. The battery bank could keep the equipment running for hours, maybe a day, depending on load. There was no diesel generator here, only batteries and inverter. But there was a secret advantage. The equipment itself didn't draw as much power as people assume. A relay hut isn't a data center. Most of its load is radios, network gear, and environmental control. The heater only ran when it got cold enough, and even then it was modest. We reduced the load further. We powered down non-essential gear. We shut off one redundant link that wasn't carrying critical traffic. We turned off the interior lights except when needed. Every watt saved was time. Then security. The fence was useless now that it was cut. We couldn't fix it without tools and time we didn't have, and even fixed, it wouldn't stop determined people. So we made the hut itself the fortress. We added another mesh panel over the cable entry port where coax and waveguide entered from the mast. It was already sealed, but I didn't trust any opening once I'd seen what human hands could do. We made noise discipline rules. No yelling. Radio volume kept low, no slamming doors, no unnecessary transmissions. Then we planned for contact. If the armed group came, we needed to see them before they were at the door. The roof gave a vantage point. The window gave limited sight lines. We set up a simple watch rotation. One person resting while the other listened and scanned. It felt almost professional, which was a strange comfort. That night, the repeating distress call continued. If anyone can hear this, Mark listened with eyes closed. They're still alive, he murmured, like he needed to say it out loud to make it true. I didn't respond, not yet. I wanted to. Every time it repeated, it pulled at something in me that didn't want to be a ghost. But I also knew the truth about radio. Transmitting is revealing. A listening post is safe because it's silent. The moment you speak, you draw a line from you to whoever is listening. On the third day, the grid power flickered. The hut's lights blinked. The hum shifted. The inverter clicked, then stabilized. Battery backup had taken the load for a moment and handed it back. Mark looked at me. "That's bad," he said. "That's the beginning of bad," I corrected. By mid-afternoon, it happened again. Flicker, click, stabilize, then again. The line was unstable. Somewhere down the ridge, something was failing. Either a substation was offline, or nobody was controlling load anymore, or the physical infrastructure was being damaged. By sunset, the grid dropped completely. The hut went quiet for a half-second, then the inverter took over smoothly. The equipment stayed on, but the status panel changed from AC present to battery supply. We were on the clock now. "How long?" Mark asked. I checked the battery monitor. "At this load," I said, "we've got maybe 16 to 20 hours before we're low. Less if it gets cold and the heater cycles." Mark stared at the racks. "No generator," he said, like he was hoping he'd missed it. "No generator," I confirmed. This site was designed for short outages, not end of the world. Silence settled again, heavier this time. We had to solve two problems at once: keep the hut alive and decide whether to reach out to the ranger station while we still had the ability to coordinate. I made the decision with a feeling like swallowing gravel. We would respond carefully. I powered up a small base radio in the rack that had a cleaner transmit capability than my handheld. I connected it to a directional antenna aimed northwest. I kept power low, just enough to reach the ranger station if line of sight and terrain allowed. Mark sat beside me, eyes fixed on the speaker. I keyed the microphone and spoke slowly, clearly, using the plain, steady tone I'd used for years during field coordination. Ranger Station, this is Ridge 11 Relay. If you can hear me, respond. Over. I released the key. Static. The repeating distress loop resumed a moment later, unchanged, like it hadn't heard me. I waited, then tried again. Ranger Station, this is Ridge 11 Relay. I have 2 people at the relay hut. We can hear your distress call. Do you copy? Over. I released. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, faint but unmistakable, a voice broke through, strained but real. Ridge 11, say again, you can hear us? Mark's eyes widened like someone had opened a window in a smoke-filled room. I keyed up again, heartbeat steadying through sheer will. Affirmative, I said. We can hear you. Identify yourself and your situation, over. The reply came with a crackle. Name's Evan Caldwell, the voice said. I'm U.S. Forest Service. We've got 9 here, 2 kids, 1 diabetic adult, low on insulin. We've barricaded the station. We can hold, but we're running out of medical supplies and fuel. I closed my eyes briefly. 9 people, 2 kids. This wasn't an abstract signal anymore, it was a group hanging on. I keyed again. Copy 9 people, 2 children, diabetic adult, low insulin. Any injuries besides that? Over. Minor injuries, Evan said. Cuts, sprains, no severe trauma. We've been careful, we keep quiet. We only transmit on schedule. I glanced at Mark. His jaw was clenched. I asked the question that mattered most. Do you have threats nearby? Infected, armed people? Over. A pause. Then Evan's voice returned, lower. Both, he said. We had infected drift-through 2 nights ago. We avoided contact, but yesterday, armed men came by. 4 of them. They didn't breach, but they watched. They have radios. They talked about a relay hut. We think they know about you. Mark mouthed. Told you. The battery monitor beeped softly. An innocent, terrible reminder. I keyed up. Copy, I said. We're on battery power only. Grid is down. We may lose relay power within 20 hours. We will attempt to conserve. We need to discuss options. Over. Evan replied immediately, like he'd been waiting for a voice he could trust. Option is, we meet, he said. We can't stay forever. You have height and eyes. We have supplies, but no reach. If you can get a portable generator up there, you keep the radio alive. If we can get down to you, maybe we combine. Mark leaned close, voice low. That's a hike with kids. I know, I whispered back. I keyed again. We have 1 injured adult with limited mobility, I said, meaning Mark without saying it. Travel from our side is possible but risky. Can you move? Over. Evan's voice came back with the fatigue I could hear in the way he formed words. We can move, he said, but not fast. And those men, they're the bigger problem. They know we have supplies. I looked at the hut's walls, at the door latches, at the battery bank. The hut was secure, but it wasn't sustainable without power. The ranger station had people, but it was exposed. The armed group was mobile, informed, and apparently deliberate. The infection was the background pressure on everything, turning every mistake into a final one. That night, Mark and I didn't sleep much. We rotated watch, listening to the radio for any sign of those armed men using comms nearby. We heard snippets, mostly short-range chatter, untrained voices, casual profanity, the kind of tone people use when they think they control a situation. At one point, just after midnight, we heard a clear phrase that made me sit up straight. "Tomorrow morning, we go up and shut the mountain box up for good." They were coming. At sunrise, the wind was sharp, and the sky was bright enough to make the snow patches on shaded slopes look blue. The hut felt colder, not because the temperature had dropped drastically, but because the heater stayed off to conserve power. We wore layers and kept moving. We made a plan that wasn't perfect but was real. We would not wait in the hut for armed men to arrive and decide our fate. We would create distance and options. The hut's battery bank was heavy, fixed. We couldn't move it, but we could reduce load and extend time. We could also scavenge. Mark remembered something useful. A maintenance shed lower on the ridge, not far from the end of the 2-track. He'd seen it during a search call last year. It might have fuel canisters, maybe even a small generator used by contractors for road work. It was a long shot. But it was a shot. If we could find a generator and bring it up, we could recharge the battery bank through the inverter charger and keep the radio alive. The hut's electrical system was designed for it. It just hadn't been provisioned with a permanent generator. That meant leaving the hut. Leaving meant risk. But staying meant a different risk, being cornered with dwindling power. We packed light, water, food, basic tools, Mark's map, and the handheld radio. I kept the shotgun not because I wanted to use it, but because the woods were no longer neutral. Before we left, I keyed up the radio and spoke to Evan. "Evan," I said, "armed group is planning to come up to the relay hut today. We're moving to find backup power. Maintain silence. If they approach your station again, do not engage. Confirm. Over." Evan's reply came tight. "Copy," he said. "Be careful." Then he added after a pause, "Thank you for answering." It hit me harder than I expected. Not because I wanted gratitude, because it reminded me this was still a world where human words mattered. Mark and I exited the hut quietly, locking everything behind us, latching the door like we were sealing a vault. The pad was empty. The fence cut still gaped. We moved downslope through trees, staying off the obvious trail. Mark, despite his injury, was careful and disciplined. He knew how to move without snapping every branch. I matched him, listening more than talking. About an hour down, we found the maintenance shed. It was a small structure tucked beside a spur road, corrugated metal, padlocked. The padlock had been smashed already. The door hung open. Someone had been here. Inside, the shed was mostly empty shelves and scattered debris. Old cables, rusted tools, a broken snow shovel. But in the back, under a tarp, I saw the shape I'd hoped for, a portable generator, the kind contractors use. Gasoline, pull start, with a steel frame and scuffed plastic panels. My breath caught. "Please," I murmured, stepping closer as if it might vanish. I checked the fuel tank, nearly empty. Of course. But next to it sat 2 red fuel cans. One was empty. The other sloshed faintly when I moved it. Half a can. Not enough for days, but enough to recharge maybe. Mark leaned on the wall, breathing hard. "We can do it," he said. I nodded. "We can do it." We weren't the only ones who'd had that thought. As we dragged the generator toward the door, I heard a distant engine uphill. An off-road vehicle, maybe a dirt bike, maybe an all-terrain vehicle. The sound cut through the trees like a warning. Mark's eyes widened. "They're here." We killed movement instantly, crouching behind the shed, generator half in shadow. I peeked through a gap and saw figures moving on the road above. 3 men, armed, not hunting rifles but modern-looking carbines slung casually. They moved like they'd done this kind of thing before, scanning, spacing out, not rushing. They were headed up, toward the hut. My mind ran through options in a blink. If they reached the hut while we were down here, they'd find it locked and reinforced. They might try to breach, they might fail and leave. Or they might wait. Or they might damage the antennas and ruin everything out of spite. We couldn't let them have time. I pulled the handheld radio, dialed to the frequency I'd heard them on last night, and listened. Static, then a voice. "Check the box, take what's useful, smash the rest," someone said. Mark looked at me, eyes hard. "We can't let them." I wasn't a hero, I wasn't trained for firefights. I was a guy who fixed radios. But I knew one thing. They were confident because they thought nobody was watching. I keyed up, voice as calm as I could make it, mimicking the tone of authority I'd heard on the county dispatch. "Unit on Ridge 11 approach," I said. "Be advised, multiple infected observed moving upslope from the south. Recommend immediate withdrawal." I released and held my breath. For a moment, nothing. Then a voice snapped back, suspicious. "Who is this?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Doubt was the weapon. I heard boots stop on gravel. Voices overlapped, arguing. One man laughed, but it sounded forced. Then another voice, sharper, said, "Move now. We're not getting trapped up there." The engine sound returned, turning away. They weren't gone forever, but we'd bought time. Mark exhaled like he'd been holding his lungs hostage. "That was," he started. "Keep moving," I whispered. "We have minutes, not hours." We hauled the generator upslope the hardest way, staying off the road, using straps and sheer stubbornness. Mark's leg slowed him, but he refused to stop. I didn't let him carry too much. I couldn't afford him going down completely. When the relay hut finally came into view again, my arms were shaking. The pad was empty. The door was intact. The latches held. We got the generator inside through the door with careful maneuvering, then closed and latched everything again. The hut's air felt like salvation. I set the generator near the cable entry point, where exhaust could be routed safely through a partially opened vent without filling the hut with fumes. I didn't take chances with carbon monoxide. Invisible mistakes kill quietly. We ran a heavy-duty extension cord through a sealed gap, tied it into the hut's external power input port, built for maintenance use, and verified proper grounding. Then I started the generator. It sputtered, coughed, then caught. The steady rumble filled the hut, vibrating the racks. I checked the charger status. It came online. The battery monitor stopped its slow decline and began to climb. Power, real power, flowed back into our system. Mark sagged against the wall, eyes closed, like he'd been holding his body together with will alone. I didn't celebrate, not yet. Because keeping the hut alive was only one part of the problem. Now we had to decide what to do with the advantage. We had a functioning listening post with extended power. We had radio contact with a ranger station holding 9 people, including children and a diabetic adult. We had armed men in the area who wanted to silence the relay hut and strip the valley for supplies. We had infected drifting through the forest like weather. And we had one mountain hut that was never meant for people, but had become the only place where signals still made sense. That night, with the generator running in timed intervals to conserve fuel, we spoke again with Evan. We didn't promise miracles. We didn't talk like action movie characters. We talked like people trying to survive long enough to help somebody else survive too. "Evan," I said, "we can keep the relay alive for now. Limited fuel. We can coordinate movement. If you choose to move, we can guide you away from trouble using what we can see and hear from up here." Evan's voice came back, steadying with relief. "Copy," he said. "We'll prepare to move at first light tomorrow. We'll travel light. We'll stay quiet." Then he added softer, "If those men come again, we can't let them take our insulin." Mark and I looked at each other across the humming racks. There are moments in survival where the question isn't, can we help, but what does it cost to refuse? Outside, the valley stayed dark. Inside, the radios kept talking. And for the first time since the outbreak began, I felt something unfamiliar and dangerous in my chest. Something that wasn't fear. It was responsibility. Because when the signals go dark, the people who can still hear become the last thread between strangers. And threads, I was learning, were worth reinforcing. The last thread between strangers. And threads, I was learning, were worth reinforcing. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.